Hello and welcome to Rush Hour. I'm Ankur Mishra. In next half an hour, we'll talk about all the news that matters to you around the globe. And let's get started with the news which the whole world is watching. The US and European Union released a joint statement detailing the trade deal. The framework unveils details of tariffs on some core sectors, including pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and the US will impose 15% tariffs on EU exports. The framework reiterates that EU will purchase $750 billion worth of US energy and invest at least an additional $600 billion in US. To discuss about this iconic deal, I have with me David Roche, strategist at Quantum Strategy. Mr. Roche, welcome to ET Now. My first question to you is, within a month of an informal deal being announced, now this is a done deal between EU and US. Do you think it will pave the way for further these kind of deals happening around the globe, especially for other countries?
Well, it's probably a blueprint, but it's not really a negotiated trade deal. It's an exact reproduction of what was announced on the day of the so-called agreement between Europe and the US. But what it does is it does codify things a little bit more clearly. At least it is a joint statement, which means that one side cannot interpret what was said on such and such a day in one way, while the other side interprets it in another way. But it is very far from the sort of thing which I would describe as a trade deal, which requires an immense amount of detailed negotiation and would probably take 1 to 4 years.
Right. A few of the specifics of the deals are, of course, they have cut tariffs on European autos. Now, current rate is 27.5%. That has been reduced to 15%. Do you think this implementation will happen in entirety as discussed?
No, I don't. There are bits of it which will happen. The 15% kind of tariffs on pretty well everything will happen. And the no tariffs on US manufactured imports into Europe, that'll happen. What will not happen is the energy deal, the 600 billion of new investment which Europe is supposed to put into the US. All of these things are not going to happen. So I would say when it becomes evident that that's not happening because the European Commission does not have the power to make that happen, then I think we will have the risk that Donald Trump comes back one morning and he just decides that he's going to raise the tariffs on the European Union to 35% instead of 15%. So no, I don't think that a lot of the things that are written down in this document are going to happen. And when they don't happen, then I think we're going to see more trouble on tariffs.
There are also statements which are coming in from different parts on this deal, and GTRI has issued a statement that New Delhi should push for a similar carve-out and flexibilities in CBM and sustainability rules, especially to shield Indian SMEs and exporters from disproportionate cost. We are discussing about India as well because a trade deal is in works for very long and there are different kind of statements which has come. Do you think this will also give impetus for India-US trade deal in future once US and EU trade deal, even if it is formalized in some manner now?
Well, I think it can provide something of a blueprint, but there are other issues. There are things in common, like, for example, the European Union is not going to let American agricultural produce have free access to its markets. And India has got a similar problem on food. So that's kind of shared. But then you come to the other things which are driving tariffs, which is if Trump doesn't like you, for example, in Brazil, doesn't like the justice system, so he puts on tariffs. And in India's case, he doesn't like that India is consuming Russian oil. So you kind of a deal like this, which is a kind of total capitulation, actually, and absolutely ridiculous capitulation by the European Union to America, and expect this to be exactly something which you can use as a blueprint. The only thing you can use as a blueprint is that it's written down on a sheet of paper, and there is basically a joint statement of what tariffs will apply to what areas. But the big thing in India's case is what's going to happen about Russian oil. Now, at the moment, looks like Trump wants to go easy on Russia. So in that case, he doesn't want to raise secondary tariffs on Russian oil through putting tariffs on places like India and China. He wants to go easy on that. But, that doesn't tell you very much about next week or next month when it becomes obvious that Putin is not going to kowtow and not going to stop the war in Ukraine. And Trump feels insulted. And then he hits Russia with every form of tariff and embargo he can. In this case, tariffs would come back on India and increase tariffs because of the Russian oil trade. So I don't think you can take this as a blueprint for what India can sign up with the United States. Bits of it, yes, the pattern of negotiation, probably, but not the details.
Of course, talking about US and EU trade deal, it has been mentioned about investment. $600 billion of investment has been promised, and $750 billion of US energy purchases are also part of the statement that has been released. I want to understand in two parts. First, who has benefited more in this deal, according to you? And also, do you think these kind of investments are more realistic than they are announced?
Well, the first thing is the US is a clear winner. It's walked all over Europe. Europe should never have negotiated on this basis. For instance, the US has a massive $75 billion trade services surplus with Europe, but it's not even mentioned in the deal. It would halve the trade surplus which the EU has with America. So, in other words, if you negotiate on the basis of what international trade is all about, which is trading services and trading goods, then half of the problem which Trump believes he has with Europe would have disappeared. So this deal is economically absolutely nonsense. And as regards politically, it's a complete and utter capitulation of Europe to the United States because Europe is so weak and so divided, and because German car producers don't want to pay 27.5% tariffs, they want to pay 15%. So therefore, they will not actually stand up to the United States through the EU Commission. So it's absolutely a very cowardly deal, unlike what India is doing, standing up to the United States. As regards these things like $600 billion worth of investment, well, the EU companies are already making $600 billion worth of investment in the US. Do you really think they're going to do it again just because the EU Commission under Ursula von der Leyen tells them to do so? That's nonsense. Not going to happen. As regards to trade in energy, well, I mean, clearly Europe wants to import less LNG from Russia and import more LNG from somebody else. But if you limit it to the United States, then you have ruled yourself out of the market where major Gulf states like UAE are coming on stream with massive gas exports and LNG. So you've put yourself out of a competitive market. Does that make any sense? No way.
Mr. Roche, one more thing I want to ask you, that Trump had threatened 30% here, settled for 15%. Do you think it is a kind of leverage or compromise for future negotiations?
Well, look, it's not based on any economic rationale, because the whole idea of reciprocal tariffs and all that is absolutely economic junk. If you look at it, it's supposed to be half of the trade account surplus which a country runs with the United States as a percentage of their GDP. There's no economic rationale to that. The only rationale to that is because some of his rather unqualified trade negotiators can actually do a spreadsheet in Excel. But economically, it means absolutely nothing. But we've come out at 15%, and for the moment, that seems to be the common denominator. So I would think that for India, the 15% is probably a floor.
All right, Mr. Roche, thank you so much for joining at this hour with your views. And thank you so much for putting forward that comparison between this deal and what India is negotiating.